Hey there. I'm here to give you my last and final message of the semester for this class, and this is all about mastering. The inevitable point that we get to in the process of making some sort of a product where we sort of do the final bit to it and put it out into the world. This is the last chance, the last stop, and this is the last place where we can really make it great and also make it screwed up. But mostly what we're really just trying to do is make the physical master from which copies are generated. This is what traditionally mastering is all about. Mastering actually refers to just the simple act of making the master from which things are copied. All this other stuff is all pre-mastering. Actually, technically, it's all pre-mastering. The mastering actually refers to making the master. We're not going to be talking about that stuff, all the physical stuff about making CD masters, vinyl masters. That's a whole nother discussion. That's a whole nother deal because in this day and age, really, our masters are going to be pretty much digital. We're going to be putting them out there and getting them out to streaming services, putting them online. We may get them downloaded on iTunes, get them played on radio services. This is pretty much what we can hope for from our mastered product now. So we also do need to master for vinyl. All this process we'll be talking about is applicable to that. But the actual cutting of the vinyl on the lathe, we're not going to get into that right here today. Historically, it was just the process by which the audio signal is prepared for the maximization for whatever the medium is. And originally, we're going live to disc with a stylus. So the preparation, as we refer to it, is just making sure the levels are correct. That the groove pitch is properly set so that the amount of space between the grooves is set to handle whatever the excursions are, and that the stylus is not cutting too deep or shallow. This was basically what the mastering engineer had to deal with. Then over time, equalization gets brought into the menu because all of a sudden you have the RIAA curve with vinyl, and this was the way that we were able to get low frequencies onto vinyl. We'd add high end, take off low end in the process of putting it on there, and then replace that low end and take down that high end on the other end when it's being played by the cartridge. So yeah, obviously there was a process of doing equalization that had to be handled for vinyl. And then, of course, limiting had to be employed to sort of control the signal because as we're trying to get more and more frequencies onto vinyl, which is the way we were listening to stuff at the time, we had to guarantee the signal being a certain level so we didn't have problems where the groove excursions would pop the needle out of the groove. Recording media sort of grew in its ability to record and reproduce more frequencies and amplitudes, and so did the need for this preparation process, and now we call that mastering. And eventually people who perform this increasingly necessary function become recognized individually, and artists even in their own right. So you have right around 1967, Bob Ludwig goes independent and becomes a distinctly separate process from the physical manufacturing. Because it used to be that the mastering person was there at the physical manufacturing plant, and that's when it happened. But then, starting in the late 60s, Ludwig and a bunch of other folks, Bernie Grundman, some famous names you may see on the back of albums. Since the advent of the CD, the mastering engineer has actually become even more crucial. It's gotten to the point now where even home enthusiasts have commercially available products can do mastering on Pro Tools. You have some stuff you can maybe use for mastering, although I don't necessarily advise using the stuff that comes with Pro Tools to master a product. We'll get into that in a minute. Problem is also this modern mastering for CDs, because CDs can handle so much more data, so much more than vinyl or tape could. This has sort of contributed to this thing that we hear about called the volume wars. And the volume wars is sort of, I think we've reached the crest of the volume wars to a certain extent because the streaming services have imposed certain limitations. Mastering for iTunes have imposed certain limitations, and now there's a ceiling that's been set by the industry that we can't go past, and now we have to bring our mixes to sort of conform to that, and the mastering engineer is a big, big component of that. I mean, the thing that we also have to take into consideration with mastering is that we're no longer mastering for really great audio systems. Quite frankly, we are mixing for headphones, earbuds, computer speakers, car stereos, almost anything but an audiophile environment. So Mastering has a sort of, not only that we're dealing with these volume issues, but we're also dealing with a lot of these listening issues. How do we have a file that ends up working in all these environments and is the best audio that we can create? The main point we have to make about mastering, though, is that mastering is not about fixing a mix. I mean, you can't really make the electric bass louder in mastering without making all of its attendant frequencies louder. I mean, and this line has become blurred more because of stems, this usage of stems. A lot of times, the mastering engineer is asked to fix a mix before they start the mastering process, and using stems to do that. And a lot of these guys don't really want to do that, actually. They're not really super happy about that, but they'll take the check and do the work. So a lot of times they're being asked to do that, but really that's not what they should be doing. If they're going to do that, they have to do that and then stop and then recalibrate for mastering. Mixing and mastering are two different things, and they should not be done simultaneously. They're not things that should be even done one from the next. They need to actually have a little time between the two to sort of live with things a bit. Mastering is about maximizing the mix for the medium and then making masters and files that are suitable for commercial manufacture. That's basically what it is now. What they do to it sonically should contribute to the ability for these mixes to translate as well as possible to every possible listening environment and sound really, really good doing that. The other thing I should probably get into about mastering here is that a lot of the responsibilities that I'll be discussing about mastering is predicated on the assumption that we're mastering a group of songs for a manufacturing product, like a record or a CD. Manufacturing a single song for digital release would naturally skip a lot of things I'll be discussing, but still a lot of things apply, like EQ, compression, repair, peaks and RMS, mastering for iTunes, Spotify, and LUFS levels. That still does apply to much of what we'll be talking about. So let's talk about the mastering process. What is it? You show up at the mastering suite and you're the producer maybe, and you go to a mastering person, and what are we going to do? So the first thing is that you're going to upload it into a DAW that's designed for mastering. And there are several that are the industry standards. We have AudioCube, Pyramix, Sadie, Sequoia, Soundblade, Wavelab, and those are the main ones. There may be some other ones that are coming out. And the reason why we use these DAWs is that they're designed for this process. There's a lot of data being crunched when we're trying to do a lot of really super high-end work with audio, and especially when we're upsampling, all of a sudden we have a lot of data that's getting played with. So these DAWs can handle it in a way that Pro Tools and Ableton and a lot of our professional mixing DAWs, that they're really not ideal for this. These DAWs are designed to handle a lot of different files at different sample rates and word lengths. They're designed to handle any kind of conversions that need to happen in any situation. They also would like to see 96 kilohertz sample rate files whenever possible. We've been doing a lot of 48 in class, but when we're doing stuff on the professional level, for records right now, it's 96. That's pretty much the professional level we want to go at. We can go higher than that at this point, but 96 is pretty good. First thing that we're going to do is we'll bring it into the DAW and then edit and sequence the tunes. We'll put each tune in its proper spot, doing any top and tail edits to make sure everything's clean. If it hasn't been done already, should be done already. And then put them in the right order and then work out times between them, if there's any fades that are happening. One of the things about mastering is that if you have crossfades going between songs, for instance, it's kind of important to actually do that in mastering rather than try to do it yourself, because it's really hard to place the P and Q flags yourself if you don't have the technology for that. That's one of the things that basically tells the CD player, if you have crossfades going between songs, you should have this done in mastering. Either be there yourself or have very, very specific instructions for your mastering engineer. Make sure that time between the songs is set just right, because a lot of times if we're listening to a CD, I don't want a song to come in really fast after a certain point where I want a moment of introspection, and sometimes I want it to slam right into it. So that's actually something you want to worry about and work on. One thing I should also mention, that if there's going to be a vinyl run at some point, then there is going to be at some point where a lot of the stuff that's going to be happening next will be done differently. EQ, compression needs to be done differently for vinyl than for CDs and for downloads. There are rules to that. Again, I can't really get into a lot of the specifics about vinyl. When you have a mastering engineer do a record for you and there's going to be a vinyl release, they're going to run a slightly separate run on each of the songs to get those maximized for vinyl. Let's talk a little bit about the mastering suite. If you're going to be there as a producer and be present for this stuff, you might get to sit in the mastering suite and watch this happen. I always recommend doing that if you're making a record. Be there when it happens. To be there when the masterings happen is a huge revelation to you about your mix and about what can be done to your mix to make it even better. It's something you don't want to miss if you have the opportunity. So you have the mastering suite, and most of these places have pretty good high ceilings, extremely well sound treated, bass traps where they need to be placed. The suite itself is almost near the room center, maybe back a little bit. You have really high fidelity, usually 3 to 4-way speakers with 3 or 4-way crossovers set just perfectly for the mastering engineer's tastes. Then you also have some consumer gear to do checks on, so you can go back and forth between really high quality to really hear what's going on, and consumer gear to sort of hear what the consumer's going to hear. There'll be the computer with the software, all the drives, and then there'll usually be a very high quality stereo tube compressor, a very high quality digital compressor, both of these stereo compressors. There'll usually be a very high quality stereo EQ, parametric, and digital EQ. Most mastering engineers will have both analog and digital gear in their racks. Depending on the flavor of the music that they're mastering, they can make the adjustments between analog and digital for whatever. And then sometimes you'll find there will also be a mid-side stereo arrangement where they can go ahead and set the stereo out a little bit by messing with the mid to the side level arrangement, and also so you can actually EQ mid and side separately if you want to. There's some opportunities for messing with the stereo spectrum there. And that's pretty much it. It's not like being on a console mixing studio where you just have lots and lots of faders. There's not a lot of that in a mastering studio. You're really mixing for 2 faders. The mastering engineer also has a specialized monitor device to control the power of the monitors to really fine-tune what the level they're listening to things at. Then there's also a sophisticated signal router and a patch bay that allows the mastering engineer to really easily change combinations of devices. Because a lot of them like to have different kinds of ADC and DAC converters for different flavors. And then the session itself usually takes about 3 to 4 hours, a 10-song project, and which usually comes out to about 18 to 24 minutes per song. And a lot of this time is spent on the first mix. And it's usually not the first mix in the sequence. It's usually the loudest. They'll pick the loudest one or the one that has the most extreme dynamics, and that's where they'll set their basic compressor settings and start with the EQ from that, and then adjust the other songs based on that one. If all the songs are recorded and mixed in the same studio by the same person, then the mixes have a sonic signature that will apply to all the songs really on the album, and so that makes it easy for that initial EQ and compression setting to run across the entire record, with some tweaking, of course. But then if you have multiple track mixes from different bands, studios, times, producers, time that's spent addressing any sonic differences between them is going to be with the goal of helping them coexist together. You don't want your record to sound like things were done in different places. They all need to have a certain cohesion, and mastering is where this can really happen. So a couple of things that of course we're going to be dealing with would be equalization, and very high quality equalization at that. And we're talking about very, very small increments and usually very wide cues. When you add 1 dB of a band across a mix, keep in mind that's like adding 1 dB to each and every fader on the mixer. So that's a cumulative. A 1 dB fader move all of a sudden jumps out very, very heavily in mastering. So a lot of times we're dealing with 0.5, 0.7 dB even. These little sort of adjustments can make a big difference, especially if you're trying to get your mixes into a certain kind of competitive situation. EQ is a big factor to that. You'll find that it's kind of rare that these guys like to use multiband compression. A well-mixed tune shouldn't really require much multiband compression, is the general sort of way of thinking about that in mastering. But be that as it may, they can be still useful. For instance, you can sort of control where the vocal range is without it affecting what's happening on the low end. And you can have 4 different bands. You can really sort of dial in the spectral contour of the record in a way that you really couldn't do in mixing unless you employed it in mixing. And by the way, you really shouldn't do that. There's not a lot of EQ that's done at this process. Very, very lightly done, very, very tastefully done. Then in compression. And when it comes to compression in mastering, the mastering engineer is looking at macro dynamics and micro dynamics. Macro dynamics being sort of the dynamics between song sections. Does the verse lift up to the chorus and then back down? Is there a sense of dynamics between different sections of the tune? And then microdynamics deal with the music's inherent rhythmic expression, the qualities of the transients and the short-term peaks. And mastering engineers can really reinforce the dynamics of a tune by doing subtle gain rides. Sometimes that'll happen. They'll do very, very light gain rides over the course of a verse to help it build sort of subconsciously. And they also have digital and analog compression available. So it depends on what the project likes, or sometimes they'll use a little bit of both. A very important thing that the mastering engineer has to do at one point is then level out the songs. A lot of times the mixes aren't always sounding the same level if you put them all together one after the other. And it's up to the mastering engineer to make sure that none of the songs come in sounding too quiet or too loud after the one preceding it. So that's an important, and then any sound repair that has to happen. And let's face it, if you've done a bunch of work as a producer on a record, you should have done the sound repair. If there is need to do it, your mastering guy or gal probably has really, really high quality sound repair stuff and can do it fairly quickly. So if there is something's a little too clicky or a little too weird, but you liked everything else about it, but there's just a little bit of weirdness there, yes, your mastering engineer can take care of that for you. And then there's the aspect of mid-side. In mastering, a lot of times you have a situation where you can open it up with the mid-side and you can EQ the mid or the side individually. You can also bring down the mid-level, bring up the side level, which has the quality of spreading out the stereo field. At some point, the mastering engineer is going to ask you if you want your volume to be competitive. In other words, pushing it to the maximum level possible. And how can you answer no to that? You'll probably say yes. And then they'll make sure that the final levels are copacetic for mastering for iTunes and optimized for streaming services. Those are two things that they also will do for you. And then at that point, if the producer's not present, sample mixes are going to be rendered and sent to Dropbox, WeTransfer, or an FTP file, so the producer or the label or whoever's responsible can listen and sign off. And this is a very important aspect of mastering, is that before it's committed to a mastering scenario where it's going to be copied, this is the last chance for the producer, artist, anybody that has the decision-making process to listen to the mix and go, oh, we need to fix that, or yes, that is awesome, and sign off on it. This has to happen, and the responsible party has to do this. It's usually the producer that does this, or whoever the label representative is. And it's usually fairly instantaneous. We send the files off. There's an appointment made already, is ready to be received. The producer listens, makes comments, directs those comments back, and it's fixed and it's taken care of, and the process moves forward. We've edited and sequenced the entire thing. We've done EQ, compression. We've done all these kind of things that we wanted to do to the sound of it. We're ready to finish this. Before we do that, this is the point where the mastering engineer has to do a bunch of busy work, and this is where authoring comes into play, especially if it's for CDs. A good mastering engineer keeps track of all the stuff that they do, because sometimes they have to go back and redo something. They need to make sure they can get it back quickly. And the authoring duties happen, and these used to be handled by the labels themselves, but hey, not everybody's on a label, right? As it turns out, CDs have a series of subcodes that are present in the frames that provide instructions to the CD players as to where the songs are, how long they are, how much time should elapse between them. And these are called P and Q codes. They're letter code abbreviations for information contained in subcodes of the compact disc. The P flag changes the state to indicate the beginning of a new track, and the Q flag contains timing, program length, copy permit prohibit, emphasis, which actually, this is the thing about CDs. There was, for a while, you could actually have pre-emphasis on your CD, which that went away very quickly, actually. ISRC codes, and I'm going to get into these in just a second. And then a PQ log needs to be printed out, so that can be also taken to the manufacturing plant so that even though they're going to be already embedded. The folks that are doing the manufacturing can check them against the list and make sure everything's kosher, and if they're not, they can make adjustments as needed. There's a point where you have to do quality control, and that's usually at the plant, so you might not have to worry about that. They didn't used to be under the purview of the mastering engineer, but these other codes have to be placed into the master DDP before delivery. What are these codes? One of them is the EAN code. This is a 13-digit barcode that's encoded in the subcode area. The ISRC code, which stands for International Standard Recording Code. These are codes that are either provided by the record label or you have to make them yourself if you're the record label. And these go to the RIAA, and these are unique tracking codes for each song individually on the album. It's a 12-digit code plus a 2-digit country code on the top. The first 3 digits are the code for the issuing label. The next 2 digits are the year the song was released, and then the last 5 digits are assigned to the song itself, just in case there are other versions of the same song done by other people. Each song has its own code that follows it around on the internet and allows it to be tracked. And then on top of that, we have CD text that we can put into our CD, and that is metadata that displays the song title, artist, album name, and genre. And we have specially equipped players that can read this. But anyways, all of this can be pretty much embedded into the DDP. DDP stands for Disk Description Protocol. And this is basically what all masters end up being at this point. You either can file this electronically or you can put it onto a disk and bring that to the manufacturing plant. But this is what they will receive to then make CDs and make also your downloads from. So the DDP has become the master format that you end up with. And this master file should be delivered to whoever the label is, if that's you, along with what we call an MD5, which is a checksum, and it should be in a zipped file. Anytime you're doing any kind of transferring of major audio files from one place to another, always use a zip file. When you send the DDP file to Apple, CD Baby, or TuneCore, or whoever, they will then do the conversion to their coded formats. You don't do their conversions. They take care of their conversion to their codecs. So the DDP has become the preferred format for mastering because it also incorporates the metadata that goes with the raw audio. And they're file-based. And that means as files, they can be compared against a master file to see if they have 100% data accuracy. And that's why I want to zip. A DDP file set contains 6 files. The audio image file called image.dat plus auxiliary files that contain PQ codes, CD text, also show what version this is, and also any ancillary information. And also is included as an MD5, which is our checksum, which is the checksum is calculated at the moment the master is made, and then that provides verification for accuracy through the process, which is very important. There's a company called Sonoris that makes a DDP maker that also allows you to make a proprietary encrypted player burner to send to your client for the reference. For instance, when I had my record made, I sent it to this gentleman in New Orleans, and when he was ready for me to listen to it, he sent back to me the files, and he also made a special player for my DDP, and it could also burn, so I could also burn a CD from that and do a reference around the house in my CD player, do some listening, make some decisions about it. That's a pretty cool function about Sonoris' DDP player. I recommend that if you're going to get into it. Those things cost about $250, $260. If you're even thinking about having mastering in your world, then you need to have that. And that's $260 well spent. The Sonoris DDP maker will actually plant the P and Q codes for us. And it takes care of a lot of these other processes, also plants in the ISRC codes and the EAN codes, and sort of does all that for you. So then all you have to do is just sort of then upload the material in the order that you have it, that's been mastered with the EQ and in the compression, and then that will then create the image. You send that in to your manufacturer, and then they will make the CD from that. So there you have it. And then there'll be a point where there's this quality control with CDs, and they have to have these media evaluators, and they got to find out there's errors on it, because CDs are crazy, and I guess it's probably a good thing they're about to go because there's so much going on with error correction. There are just so many bits that are involved. I just want to sort of show you this real quick. I mean, each audio sample, for starters, is a 16-bit integer. They're divided into frames of 12 samples each. So you get basically 192 bits per frame, and then you have another 64 bits of data per frame for the cross-interleaved Reed-Solomon code, another 8 bits for subcodes. Then we make all of our 8-bit words into 14-bit words to reduce the 0 to 1 transitions. And then we add these merging bits. And then we have a 27-bit word that's added to the beginning of the frame that sort of gets you our sync data. A frame on a CD consists of 588 bits of channel data to express 192 bits of music. That's what makes CDs kind of work, is we have amazing amounts of error correction and redundancy that's just basically spread out all over the CD. So if there's a damage to a certain point, it will be able to pick up and figure out and interpolate what's supposed to be there, and you won't even hear it happen until, of course, your CD goes completely buggy and it goes skip, 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 skip. So you don't want to worry about any of that stuff. You just have one song and you want to master it. And you want to get into a competitive level and EQ, and so what are you going to do? You don't have to worry about PQ codes and CDs. You just want to master your song. One thing you can do is there is Landr, Landr, which is a service to which you can upload your file and they will do mastering for you. You give them certain parameters and they'll master it for you for a fee, and it's cheap. And a lot of people really like it. For certain kinds of genres that don't really require a lot of sort of help, these are really, really very successful. A lot of people have been pretty happy with Landr, but at the same time, most of us in the business don't really think that's the way to do it. We like the human touch. We think it's important to have somebody with a good pair of ears really listening. And with Landr, it's usually an algorithm, although if you pay extra bucks, then you actually get a real person. That's Landr. I'm not going to say don't do it. I'm not going to say do it, but you can try it out. There's actually a little feature on that webpage where you can kind of get some kind of a try before you buy sample. It could be kind of cool. You might like it better. But if you're going to do it yourself, well, number one, you need the best possible plugins. In this case, I guess I would just say for the affordability in our sphere, I would say Ozone 9 will probably be our best bet to have at least that, because it has the EQ, has compression, it has a lot of the elements. Between Ozone 9 and RX7 for any kind of repair jobs, we can pretty much get what we need to do. You probably have already done some stereo bus compression in your mix. So what you're going to probably do is take your mix, pull it into your DAW, and listen to it and think about it. And at this point, you really, really want to bring out a reference CD, because now you are comparing to an actual mastered CD, and at this point you really do want to sort of go, okay, how can I get it close to this really great mastered CD that I like? Because we really couldn't do it quite like that when we were listening to our mixes, but in mastering, now we're there. So we may need to do some subtle EQ moves, and I recommend nothing over 1 dB. If you're doing more than that, then I think you might be overdoing it. You could be doing some bad things to it. So you want to do very subtle work with EQ. Compression. Again, the important thing to do is to make sure that you have a true peak setting on your limiter at -1 dB, because this is still going to be the critical thing for us going forward with all of our streaming and our downloads. This is going to be the main thing that they're going to be looking for, because if true peaks go over this, you're going to get turned down by whatever that is. It's just going to happen. You want to make sure that that sort of stops there and your mix is set to that. Then you can look at some compression moves. Sort of see what kind of compression you want to have overall. If you feel like you didn't get it already enough of it before, but now maybe fill the space and take some more chances with the compression and fill it in some more. Referencing it back and forth with the commercial CD. Then you might want to look into some MS if you want to spread out your stereo a little bit. If you have an MS setting in Ozone, I think there is one there, but if not, if you have a plugin that can do that. And then you must engage your LUFS meter. And I sent everybody an LUFS meter earlier, and I recommend using it and just having it in your arsenal, because from this point forward, you're going to be mixing for streaming. This is where the rubber hits the road with it. You need to be making your mixes at -14 LUFS. And what that means is that it's an average over the entire tune. It's not just the peaks. It sort of looks at the entire song and gets an idea of the overall average RMS level of the song and comes up with a number based on that. True Peaks get the instantaneous reading. You get short term, which sort of gives you every 2 or 3 seconds, and then LUFS, which is loudness units full scale. We want to set our meter to -14 LUFS for Spotify. Medias have different ones. You need to be up to speed on whatever that is, but generally -14 is going to be your target. Between that and -18. Here's the deal. Here's what's happening out there. With Spotify, if you try to have your stuff louder than that, they're just going to turn you down. And any advantage that you think you're getting by having your mix just a little bit louder, because remember, just a little bit louder sounds better to everybody. So if you make your mix just a little bit louder, like -13 dB LUFS, they're just going to pull it back down. There's no advantage gained by trying to game volume at this point. So volume wars, as we know it, is kind of at a standstill with this, because now we are consuming music through streaming. So now we're mastering for streaming. Then the other thing that you need to do is you need to run your mix through mastering for iTunes. And there's a droplet that they have built for you. Open up the Mastering for iTunes, check out the README, and it'll show you exactly how to go ahead and drop in your mix. It will basically send it to Apple. They'll do a conversion on it and look at it and see how many overages is going to occur before they transfer it to their codec. In other words, you also need to make sure that you are maximizing your levels for iTunes, because that's where a lot of people are also downloading and paying for it. And also there's iTunes Radio, which is in competition with Spotify. And if you're ever wondering what your levels are for iTunes, I didn't realize this, but you can go to iTunes, if you have iTunes, right click on your song in iTunes, whatever the song is, and click on Song Info, and then go up to the File tab, and it'll open up and it'll tell you in the volume setting how much they're going to turn this song down for iTunes Radio. So it's really revealing. You all of a sudden realize, wow, that tune is going to get turned down. That tune's not going to get turned down. Very interesting. It gives you a real sort of insight as to the levels of a lot of the tunes that you have ownership for. I would use that tool every now and then, as well as the Mastering for iTunes droplet. And what the Mastering for iTunes droplet does is just tells you, hey, look, you're getting this many overages. It'll count them all up. And do you need to make it so that you're not getting any overages? Not really. You need to just get them to be under a certain amount. I believe it is basically laid out to you in the README file for Mastering for iTunes. You're not going to have it completely clean of those. There's going to be a few overages now and then in the codec. It's just telling you, though, that the codec is going to have to deal with these overages to try to get a better sound for you. That's basically a lot of what we're talking about with mastering in a nutshell. Other than that, it's kind of a crazy arcane art. The people that do it well have a real special talent for it, because they're able to listen to music in a way that we usually don't. They can really sort of hear exactly what kind of frequencies are not present, what kind of changes need to be made, how much the mix needs to be tilted in different directions. Does it need to have more high end in general, more low end? They're dealing with a lot of big questions in terms of just taking your mix and making it more better in some way or another, and then maximizing it for the medium. It's always been a revelation for me when I'm there at the mastering suite working with a real mastering engineer, because they always do A/B comparisons between the mix that they've got that you gave them and what they're doing to it. And after about the first 15 minutes, you just got to tell them, hey man, don't ever play A again, which is your mix, because what they're doing to it has improved it so much. It's gotten bigger, fatter, larger, more texture. So it's really amazing what the process will do for the mix. But if you have to do it at home, I recommend just experimenting with it and just trying to see if you can do the best you can to match it with competitive stuff. And that's it for mastering. Have a good one.